Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 5 of the Coaching Theory Podcast. Today, what I'm going to go over is kind of a free flow tangent here about understanding constraints, how players acquire new skills, how they can find adaptable solutions to problems, and overall, maybe how they can become more creative. I'm also going to touch on how I use constraints, how I develop environments that are unstable environments in practice for 3 different distinct purposes. And I feel that really needs to be talked about and at what levels it's appropriate for. So let's get right into this and let's begin with a brief discussion on technique and perceived affordances. So I just wanted to review a little bit about skill acquisition. So no repetition that everyone takes is ever the same, and each rep will have some commonality and stability of movement in it, but no repetition is ever going to be the exact same. So the famous tennis player Nadal says that no shot is ever going to spin or bounce in the same way. So you have to adjust the way you hit the ball for each individual shot. That's massive variability, right? So this action comes in a real-time feedback loop, which we spoke about, and variability is always present. So you're always having to be perceiving the information, be perceiving what's happening in real time, and couple your physical actions to your perceiving. So it's important, though, that even though each technique is done differently, that you have some stability in the movement itself, because this is what is going to allow you to have some sort of consistency in your repetitions when you're dealing with variability. So comfort in the stability of movement is a good thing, but I also want you to understand that it also could be a bad thing in terms of exploration. So again, it's good because it keeps consistency in the movement while you're able to make some adaptations to it. But on the other hand, if the athlete always sticks too close to their comfort zone, it limits their ability to explore new movements. So each time an athlete steps too far out of their comfort zone, though, they have this tendency to go back into their comfort zone in that movement. So if we look at the NFL quarterback Tim Tebow, right? I remember listening to a conversation where the reason that Tim Tebow was a great college quarterback is because he had more time, right? More time to decide, more time to throw the ball. And he actually had this kind of hitch in his technique with his elbow positioning in the throwing arm, and it took too much time for him to throw the ball. So in the NFL, when there was not enough time, his technique um, really took too much time, and he couldn't ever, because he did it his whole life, he couldn't ever straighten it out, right? So, however, when you're giving people, you want people to figure out ways to self-organize their technique. So it's probably better that you give limited feedback to the players in terms of what is fundamental in executing the technique, because we don't want to give them too much because it's going to disrupt the natural flow. But we have to understand that if you could get people outside of their stability range. And I'll give you an example of Peter Cech. And this all has to do with constraints, by the way. So Peter Cech is saving ping pong balls, right? He's saving different size balls. He's saving things off of wet surfaces. He's doing all these things. And what he says is the way that his body had to contort and move to save a ping pong ball, it moved in a way that was not stable, meaning it wasn't in a way that he would normally move to save a soccer ball. So he said while he was in the regular 11v11 game, he found himself making saves using the movements that he explored saving the ping pong balls that he would have never explored that movement before. So for me, though that constraint, because really you're looking at the ping pong ball is a constraint, right? It's not a soccer ball, so he has to adjust. It is a piece of equipment that creates this constraint. He has to save a ping pong ball. It's being shot out of a machine, right? And so for me, that destabilized his movement. That constraint destabilized his movement. Um, Now, I've spoken about this a million times, but like creativity in soccer can come from futsal, beach soccer, cage soccer, all these type of constrained environments. And the decisions and the skill sets that are made in these environments absolutely transfer to the 11v11 game. You could look at arena football. It was credited to quarterbacks who now they get rid of the ball faster. And even though some of the play calling now has in arena football has gone over into the NFL, but getting rid of the ball faster, right, is what we said Tim Tebow didn't do. But that's exactly the skill set that arena football is giving to quarterbacks. And think about it. Their attention, right? They're attending to not different information in the environment, but they're perceiving their attention is going somewhere else because it can't be looking all over this huge field, 100 yards long, 120 yards long, because it's a tiny little field and there's a million players in these small areas. And so it has to be very, very quick. And they're attending to information that allows them to be successful. Box lacrosse is little small goals that's a lacrosse game that's played in a hockey rink. And they say that you could tell because they have great stick handling skills that they develop from this game compared to the compared to regular lacrosse. So they say when you watch regular lacrosse and you see somebody who's got these unique skill sets, technically when they're handling the ball, you can almost be assured that they develop those skill sets playing box lacrosse. It's very popular in Canada. Same thing with futsal, right? These are all called donor sports. And they have a profound development, impact on development. And when the players go to regular games, it's completely different, but these are transferable skill sets. So those are all constraints, by the way. Even though they're donor sports, these are constraints. So players from these environments have developed these skills, and in these unstable environments where they're in this feedback loop and there's no coach that are teaching them these action capabilities, right? This is they're experiencing the environment and in this direct um, constant feedback loop they're developing these unique skill sets and capabilities. So donor sports is something that's really, really important. Now, beach soccer, right? Beach soccer is the same thing. It's not that a coach is going to be out here with some sort of objectives and this is what we're trying to learn today. It's the beach, it's the environment. And the thing is in these environments is every player is going to get what they need from this. And that's a really, really massive viewpoint, important thing here. It's not the coach focusing on today we're going to learn how to play the ball wide in beach soccer. No, the environment is going to give every player what they need. And here's the thing. That environment isn't, based upon principles here. It is overall general development. So when we talk about environments that are fraught with constraints, the goal here is overall development. It doesn't have to be a constraint that is attracting action from a game model that the coach wants to bring out of you. This is about overall development. So, overall, let's. I'll give you a little bit of wrap up about that. It's keep your sessions game representative, but game representative is definitely donor sports. Don't separate it. Keep it in the whole. Try to keep it not in one phase, two phase, three phase, splitting the game up into four phases. Keep the game in the whole, where dribbling through cones is not the game. Hitting from a batting tee is not the same thing as hitting. Scanning to yell out colors is not the game. Variability is essential, and constraints develop unique skill sets, and they can open up invitations for actions that that the coach doesn't teach them, right? You can also use constraints to amplify errors on purpose if you want. You can obviously use constraints to teach something that you want to bring out, a principle, but it doesn't have to be that, right? So it can also just be for overall development. So when athletes are immersed in these unstable environments, they can really develop overall. Now, the theory behind constraint based training, and most coaches, if you look at the way you train your teams, you use constraints already. It just might not be in such a focused way. But constraint based training can be considered like an art form, which, if you're going to make the right environments for the right level, it's not easy. So, a constraint is the introduction or natural occurrence of something that creates a boundary or limit, which makes some actions possible and leaves other actions up for the learner to explore. So, if we're going to classify constraints, you have individual constraints, which you could have a slow kid, you could have a fast kid, you could have somebody who's got a great fitness level, a low fitness level. So, all these types of things. Their motivation levels, their emotional controls, those are individual constraints. Environmental constraints are, is the field wet? Is the grass high? Is it cold? Is it warm? Is it a turf field? Is it a bumpy field? Is it muddy? All those are environmental constraints. Obviously, social constraints are built on many different things: the club culture, the country culture, all those types of things. Task constraints are a big one, right? This is related to performance in sports, like what bat are you using? What racket are you using? How big are you making the size of your training exercises? What are the number of players? How many neutral guys? No neutral guys? What are the rules of the game? Is there touch restrictions? All these things are task constraints that we can easily manipulate. So it's the interaction between the constraints and the player that lead, obviously, to the specific skill development over time. Now, designing these constraints in these environments is an extremely skillful process, and the coach is the architect of this, right? But to be like a really well-rounded coach, you have to be able to design these environments that fit into a methodology, all the way from the 4v4 game model to the 11v11 game model. Can they be positional exercises, self-organizing, whatever? It's a lot, right? So let me give you a training session example of what I did with my college team, and I'll put the video of it later on this winter, but I want to show you how radically different designing these environments can be. So remember, though, this is what I really want to hit home today. You can design these environments just as a general developmental environment. Even if you're at Manchester United, you could have the guys go into training that has nothing to do with the game model. It's just for overall development. So, and it's fraught with constraints, right? So you're developing flexible players. Those players are developing based upon obviously the interaction in that environment. It does not have to be game model. Now, the next type of environment you can create is one that, hey, the ball, we playing down the middle too much. We need to get the ball out wide. So now, I make it more attractive. I put in a constraint that forces the players to play out wide, right? That's the action capability that's most open. I can even make a rule: you have to play into one channel before you go to goal, or you have to play into two channels before. You can make it so in the channel it's 2 versus 1 all the time. They can only send in one defender, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's for constraints to push the team, to push the players towards an action, right? And most of the time that's game model specific. The other type of environment, like I mentioned before, is if I want to amplify an error and make them feel it, make them experience these things, and then they could see it from a different perspective. And I went over that in the last podcast, how you could possibly amplify errors. But this one little practice that I'm going to give you right now is the main constraint that I start off with is a time constraint. So it's an 8v6, and we're going to goal to score on a real goalkeeper, the team of 8. Now, the team of 6, they're going to score to 4 small-sided counter goals. And I start off with unlimited time, right? So when the team has unlimited time, you'll notice that they're going to knock the ball around, they're going to probe, they're going to do all these things. Then I cut it down to 45 seconds, then to 30 seconds, then to 20 seconds, then finally 15 and then 12 seconds. What happens is, as the time gets less and less, the athletes, it changes their perspective. They have to now become attuned to how can we score within 12 seconds. They are looking now, they're perceiving constantly, right? In ecological dynamics, we are perceiving. We don't just perceive it, we're perceiving the whole time. But now their attention is going to shift because there's only 12 seconds. How can we score immediately? And this changes their perspective and it changes their actions. They are going to have to look at different action capabilities. In a sense, you're destabilizing that athlete. You're forcing them to do things that they normally wouldn't do. So they're different. They're going to decide. Different decisions are going to emerge in different ways because of the time constraint. Massive. This is a really interesting exercise, especially if you're a coach who still plays. Get in that exercise and you're really going to feel the impact of it. And it's not just that, the movements of the players are going to have to change. I'll give you an example. Like if you have a forward and the forward is sitting in between 3 defenders, okay, let's just pass the ball out wide, let's shift it. He's not open. But now that striker might have to run near post. It's still 3 or 4 against 1, but because you only have 12 seconds, that striker knows they have to find what exploitable space is there. Can we create that 3v1 into actually a superiority where he comes off that last defender and one touches towards goal and scores? It's different, right? It's different. It changes perspective, and by doing that, you change action. So if we want to change it again, right? It's the same exercise, but now the team of 8 can only play the ball on the ground. However, don't tell the team that's defending that they can only play it on the ground. So they're defending against the team of 8, not knowing that that team has to keep the ball on the ground. Again, now they can't hit it far post in the air. It changes their perspective again. It forces them to pay attention and to be attuned to different things now, which changes perspective, which changes action. Now, one-touch finishing only changes action again, changes movement of the striker. Now, possibly you put a line right on top of the goal box, and 18 yards out, right in the middle, and maybe it goes straight down to the goal line. All balls after you cross the 18 on one side cannot be played forward across the middle line. So now I can't play forward balls. I have to play back or square. It changes the perception now. It changes the action capabilities. Maybe I put a one-touch box the size of the goal box on top of the box. That's the one-touch area. Now it's all one. It changes everything again, right? Maybe I rotate the positions of every player every 6 minutes. It changes what the player sees. It makes new scanning patterns, new actions, new everything. Maybe now it's one touch back, otherwise 2 touch, and no square balls and no straightforward balls. It's massively changing the environment. So that's one. How many constraints did I just give you there in one simple training session? And that's a training session that is not necessarily game model specific. If I want to do game model specific, I can simply overlay, say, Guardiola's positional grid on top of that, the 8v6, and now say, okay, you have unlimited time. Here's what each position of this positional grid means. So now I'm guiding their intentions, and that's a constraint in itself. right? The positional grid is a constraint in itself. For me, I would have a flex. I wouldn't make it so binding, the positional grid. I would allow for flexibility, but that would be a way I would use a constraint-based training using the positional grid in a game model situation, right? And then the last one was how to amplify errors. Now, like I said, the hard part is, if you're going to do this in a 7v7, do you know how to do positional game model type of rondo stuff, which is a constraint based activity, in my opinion? Everything can be viewed as a constraint, right? If you're taking away some action capabilities, and then some of them are possible, some of them are not possible. But what I'm trying to tell you as a coach is that to understand all these and to be able to create great environments all through the ages is not an easy task. And I'm going to leave you with this: is my I am a flexible coach. I like flexible game models, but I also believe in, when I get to practice, when I get to the training session, yes, I have things that are planned out. I don't just step on the field and look at the players and say, what should we do today? But I am in the feedback loop of practice with the players, and I will change things or leave them the same, or you name it, in real time with the players. I'm part of that feedback loop. And I've given this example in the past. If the players come in and they look unfocused and they look like they're not awake, the warm up that I had planned of a nice, easy warm up, whatever, might turn into a really, really aggressive, competitive warm up because of the real-time feedback loop with the energy that I was getting from the players. I got to change things right away. Scrap whatever I put on the paper. Maybe I create environments where they're having absolutely no success. Let me at least get it so they can have some success. What if they're having way too much success and it's too easy for them? Let's make it a little bit tougher. I don't want to come in with all these pre-planned coaching points, because then my whole session is kind of based towards these pre-planned jump in. I'm going to make these coaching points because this was the objective of the day and this is what I need to make. No, that's not me, and that's not actually how I believe I want to coach the game, and be a part of developing players. So listen, I really hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hope it made sense to you. And I am available on a very limited basis for part-time consulting projects. You can email me at coachdibernardo@gmail.com. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon. See ya.